CSH presents George Braddock in a series we call We Can Do Better. Part 1, Creating Person-Centered Homes for Everyone.
I too want to express that thanks to Chris and to John for making it possible for me to come back to Chicago and speak again. I've had an opportunity to do a couple of projects here, and I think that it's the environment matters. I mean, that's kind of the whole story, and I've been trying to get that point across for 35 years. For 30 years, I've been a general contractor, licensed general contractor, and journeyman carpenter by training, and had an opportunity to do some housing for 4 people in the state of Oregon who had primarily mobility disabilities and also intellectual disabilities. And they were living in a senior facility on the coast, in a little town called Florence. And the state of Oregon decided that it was inappropriate for young people to be living in nursing homes, that they really needed to be in a different kind of setting. And so they actually passed a law to that effect. And so the goal was to move these people out of this nursing home and move them into community setting. And I had done a remodel for a man named Dr. Dan Close, who was kind of a thinker about, people with disabilities don't have to live in institutions, that they can live in communities. All the people that we ever found living in institutions, we had met their equals living in the community, living in their family homes. So why were we still doing this? And so he was very much so a driver in that force. So I got a chance to do this job. And I'm a general contractor, and I like to do jobs. And so just if I was going to do anything for you, I'd come and meet you. I'd spend time with your family. I'd ask you about your habits. I'd look at the way you lived, what kind of hobbies you have, how close were you to your employment situation, how do we make a house that works for you? So I did the same thing. I went over and met these 4 people at the nursing home in Florence. And I suddenly realized that the house that they had assigned to me to remodel wasn't going to work at all. Not at all for these folks. Patty, her wheelchair she was almost supine in her wheelchair. Her wheelchair was 5 feet long. And then you had Danny, who was 22 years old, and he's a little speedster on a little narrow chair, and he was almost an athlete. And then you had Tracy, who had little foreshortened legs and a huge power chair. So how was all these people going to get to the bathroom? And really, at the end of the day, what are the 2 things you absolutely have to stay in your home? You got to get in the front door, and you got to get on the toilet. Because the rest of the stuff you can hire done. But if you can't accomplish those 2 things, then you got to go somewhere else. You got to go someplace where that can be done for you. So we went after remodeling this house and tried to take all those things into consideration, and it was very challenging. It was really challenging, and learned a lot. Made some mistakes. I thought we were really pretty good. We got all kinds of praise about our project, and then of course the day comes when everybody's going to move in, and they all show up at the house. And Danny takes off, of course, because his little speed chair, and he rockets up to the front door, and he reaches out to open the door, which had the lever lock set and the low threshold, and he wheels backwards because I had failed to make a landing at the front door. Pretty basic thing, right? And it was a big lesson. It's like God lives in the details. And you got to make sure that you take care of all those things. So I learned a lot. And one of the people that we moved, her name was Tracy. So I go over to Florence, I meet Tracy, and Tracy says, I want to have my own place and I want to have a dog. And I said, well, Tracy, I'm here to offer you a spot in a 5-person residential group home, and you can't have pets. And she said, oh, it was okay. It was okay, but she would get what she wanted. But ultimately, she would have her own house, and she would have a dog. So we moved into the Sandy Street project. 5 years later, she moved out of there into an apartment with some friends, and she was on the wait list for accessible housing in Eugene. 5.5 years later, her number comes up. She gets the affordable, barrier-free accessible house in Eugene. We get in the van, we go over to the house, and down the ramp and up to the front door, and she reaches out, and it's got a lever lock and a low threshold, and we go in, and the switches have been lowered, and the closet rod is down, and we go in the bathroom, and it's the open front toilet and the elevated stand, and that was it. That was the accessible apartment. Well, she was delighted, and she could have her dog, but she couldn't use the toilet herself. And so every day, for 2 hours a day, somebody had to come and help her use her toilet. And so I'm going to get around to finishing that story when we get started with my program. So these are three people that live together in a supported housing situation. And two of the women there, as you can see, both use conveyances. And the man on the very far left of the screen, that's my stepson. And his name's Colin. And he's 39 years old now. And he has very significant autism spectrum disorder. So when you look at those three individuals there, do they all need the same thing in a house? Well, some answers to that is yes. And they all need good light. They all need a good house. They all need a safe house. They all need a house that works for them and makes sense. But the particulars of that house are a little bit different. You know, what Jenny and Tanya needed was somewhat different than what Colin needed. Because Jenny and Tanya, actually solving their problems is pretty straightforward. It's like the door's got to be wider. You got to be able to roll into the shower. You got to be able to do the things that you need to do from a seated position. So it's very pragmatic. What is it that they can do, not what is it they can't do, and how can we facilitate that? Colin, on the other hand, has significant intellectual disability, and he has autism. So he's experiencing the world in a completely different way. So the house that makes sense for Colin needs different kinds of things. You know, in Colin's case, he can feel air currents. He's very sensitive to sound. You know, he sometimes gets aggressive. He will bang on windows. He will test the strength of materials. So he needs a different kind of an environment. Does that mean that his needs are any less important to him having a full life as making a ramp and a roll-in shower for Tanya and Jenny? And the argument I've been trying to make for 35 years is no. Making modifications, environmental modifications that work and make sense for people with intellectual disabilities has a profound effect on their lives and how they live their lives as a wheelchair ramp and a roll-in shower. So these are four principles that I've learned over 35 years of doing this. And you all have them in your book, so I don't necessarily need to read them to you. And I'll expand on them as we go through the project. And it's just, these are like, I think these are kind of basic truths that experience has taught me. I've done 1,500 jobs in my career for people with developmental disabilities. You multiply that, divide that over 35 years, and I was doing 4 jobs a month. I've worked with people with every kind of disability and have always found it possible that people can live in community. People can live in community. And what experience has taught me is that if you empower an individual, this is Colin's house once again, to do things for themselves, to direct their own lives, there are several things that are true. They have happier lives. They are more satisfied. They are more integrated in their communities. And the people who support them have to do less work, and there's less stress in the house. But you got to be able to know what's going on. You got to be able to know what's going on with Colin. You got to be able to see through the house. You got to look at how do you get the information. How do you make sure that the place continues to evolve and continues to work for the person that's there? So this is a lot about how do you pay attention. You know, so I like to think about houses that are kind of transparent. Like to me, the ultimate transparency is how did my mom know from the kitchen what I was doing in the bedroom at the other end of the house? How did she know that? But she knew it. George, what are you doing back there? So, you know, I can't quite figure that one out, but, you know, there are things we can do with the physical environment that help us gather information, help us learn things, and that's what a lot of this is about. And right down here, there's a thing I call the magic of the aquarium. And something about aquariums that people with autism spectrum disorder believe that they can see you through the aquarium, but that you cannot see them. And that may sound, you know, crazy, but it has been proven true again and again and again, where I can observe what's happening with Colin, and he doesn't actually realize or pay attention to or recognize the fact that I'm observing him. But this whole scene that you see there is really about that interconnection, because one of the problems that Colin had when he moved into this house is Colin would handle his own feces. This is a difficult thing to deal with in the community. Difficult to get people who want to live with someone who handles their own feces. And of course, I had to tell Tanya and Jenny, right, that they were going to move in with a man who handled his own feces. And Tanya said to me, that poor man, 30 years in an institution is where she'd spent her life and moved out into a community. She chose to live with a man who handles his feces. But that still put a lot of responsibility on me as a builder. How do we deal with that? And I have to know when he's doing it. I set up the end of the house so that the air vacuum system is pulling the smells out of the building. I make things that are totally cleanable. I adjust, accommodate, I think of ways to make it work, and then I got to stay on top of it. And if I'm going to get Colin to quit handling his feces, I got to know when he's doing it. I got to know when he's doing it. I got to collect information. I got to be able to see. And that's what this is all about. How do we figure that out? And we did figure it out. And you'll see later some of the modifications we made to accommodate it. People have capacities. Everyone has strengths. Everyone has things that they can do. Everyone has something to contribute to their community and something they can do for themselves. Self-determination, self-empowerment. And it works really when the environment works for them. So when you think about, how do you facilitate someone who might want to learn to cook, who has significant autism spectrum disorder, that has artistic capacity? If you don't create a space, if you don't make an environment that supports that allows that to take place, then that potential is lost. That potential is lost. And you begin to see the person differently. So accommodate those talents, recognize them, look for them, and figure out ways that you can facilitate them. This is my friend Emery Blackwell. Emery Blackwell has cerebral palsy. He and I have been friends for more than 30 years. Emery is really quite a wise man. He's quite a wise man. And although he has significant cerebral palsy and he can't do anything with his hands, he requires complete assistance. Feeding, dressing, bathing, toileting, 100% assistance. Although he's really strong. He's really a strong man. And he and I, in fact, rode together across the state of Oregon on a tandem bicycle with Emery in the front of the bicycle and myself behind. And you'd strap Emery into that bike and lock his feet to the pedals, and he was like having, a Volkswagen motor on the front of your bike. It was like amazing, right? But here's the deal. In this picture, Emery's 44 years old. So for 44 years, every time Emery went to the toilet, someone had to wipe him. And of course, Emery's telling me this story because he and I are getting ready to ride a bike together across the state of Oregon. And he says, whenever I go to the toilet, you're going to have to wipe me. And I need you to do a good job. He said, because I don't want to have to talk to you about this all the time, but I want to tell you one thing. He said, I can tell what kind of day you're having when you wipe me. So you think about that for just a minute, and you say, now isn't that a pretty profound truth? Isn't that a pretty profound truth? And sometimes we fail to recognize what it's like to be on the receiving end of care. So one of the aspects of my life has been moving people out of institutions. So my friend Dan Close used to make me go up to Fairview Training Center in Portland, which was the institution in Oregon. And he said, we're going to move Carl out of here. I want you to go up and spend a day with Carl. So I'd hang around the institution, and I'd go to dinner with Carl, and I'd look at his room, and I'd go to the day program, and I'd wander around with Carl. And I'm watching Carl, it's time to take a bath, time to take a shower. So they come in to get Carl, with the Hoya lift, with this thing that kind of looks like a fish net. And he sort of stuffed the fish net underneath Carl and cranked him up in the Hoya lift and head off to the bathroom. So I called the director of the facility, James Taves, and I said, James, I want to take a shower here. Can you arrange it? And James said, well, yeah, I can arrange that. So I put it on my swim trunks, and I laid down in Carl's bed, and I said, okay, give me a bath. So in they come with the Hoya lift and the fish net, and they stuff it underneath me, and they pick me up, and my arm comes up against my head like that, and I kind of wiggle that around in there, and then they take me down the hall and into the room with a stainless steel pedestal tub at the perfect height for staff, of course. And they lay me down on this tub, which is stainless steel and cold as hell. And then they turn on the water, and 30 seconds later, the water gets warm. And so I said to staff, have you guys ever taken a shower here? No, they'd never taken a shower there. So when I go to the institutions, one of the first things I do is lay down on people's beds. Have you ever laid down on Chuck's bed? Really? $900,000 a year? And this is the best we can do for Carl? This is the best bed we can give Carl for $900,000? It's outrageous. It's outrageous. But if you can't connect to that, if you can't connect to the receiving end of that, then you're sort of missing part of the story. So remember me telling you the story about Tracy? So Tracy wants an apartment of her own and a dog. And this is her accessible apartment. So every day, 2 hours a day, staff would come to assist Tracy in doing her toilet. But we figured out that Tracy could do it herself because Tracy had capacity. Tracy could scoot. Tracy was smart. Tracy had dexterity. And we could figure out that with the transfer platform, she could transfer from her chair to a platform, use the toilet, scoot over to the tub, turn on the tub, adjust the water in the tub. And if we had a hydraulically operated seat in the bottom of the tub, we could bring that seat up. She could transfer to the seat. She could do it herself. So we go to the state and we say, look, we need about $5,000 to modify Tracy's bathroom so she can use it herself. And the state just looked at us. And they said, well, there's no money for that. But they were going to send a staff person in there every single day for 2 hours a day for the rest of her life and pay for it. So, like, the movement solves problems with people. They throw people at OTs, PTs, psychologists, physicians, psychiatrists, and they don't actually step back for a second and say, wait a minute, does this person's environment work for them? Real basic question. Does the environment work? Is there something we can do about the environment to more empower the person to do it? So this was a pretty funky looking thing, right? Because we didn't have any money. And Tracy helped us figure it out. But I'm actually standing in the tub right now, taking a picture of this back across the room. And that platform folded down and one end of it sat on the edge of the tub. And she could use it herself. Ask people how they see and feel about the world. And that's kind of the point that I'm making. A lot of the folks that I work with in institutions, they don't talk. So when I say that, I just spent some time in Porterville Developmental Center and I wanted to meet with Craig. Well, there's no point in you meeting with Craig. Craig doesn't speak. I said, well, that's okay. Craig has things that I need to learn. I need to talk to Craig. I need to be with Craig. I need to figure out how to communicate with Craig. Just because he doesn't talk doesn't mean he doesn't have something to say. Because I look at his behaviors, and every time he does something, he's talking really loud. And sometimes people aren't listening. So he keeps turning up the volume. But you don't quite get this? Let me bang on this wall again. Let me hit my head one more time. And maybe you'll get it. So we got to really think differently about how do we connect people? How do we connect to them? And how do we understand their world? And if we don't ask that question, you can't know. So I say, we're going to build you a house. What kind of chair would you like? I'm asking this to a person who lives in an institution. And he'll look around and say, well, the chair he's sitting in. It's the only chair he has any experience with, right? But if you try to take a newspaper or an ad and you start cutting out a bunch of different chairs and you present them two at a time, and pretty soon you'll see they pick one, and you present it, you're going to pick it again, and you know what? He keeps picking that same chair. So it tells me something. I think that's the kind of chair he'd like. He'd like a Barclay Lounger. What kind of color does he like? Can he pick the color? Present colors. Show him, and pretty quick what you'll find is there's a pattern, and it begins to show itself. But you got to think of a different tool. Just because he isn't talking to me in words doesn't mean he's not talking to me. So you got to ask. Everybody communicates. People's capacities change over time. One of the biggest problems we have is we take a snapshot and we build a house for them today. What's going to happen in 12 years? What's going to happen in 20 years? And how do we think about that? How do we get out of the place that say we only are going to deal with what's going on right now, and we're going to address those needs right now, and then we're done? You have to build zippers into projects. You have to think about ways to connect it, ways that they can be used in the future as a person becomes more disabled. How can we stay up with that? And how can we create opportunities for things to work? So I'm going to tell a little story here. So this is Colin's bathroom again. And one of the things that I mentioned, the fact that Colin would handle his own feces. Well, he had this real aversion to the toilet. It was way back when Colin was first diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. There were these ideas that you really needed to kind of get on people pretty hard. This was pre-ABA, and that you had to be sometimes aggressive with and force people to do things. And so there was this whole period of time when I was trying to force Colin to use the toilet. Well, for some people, that can work. But for spirited people, it just gets to the point where he wouldn't get on the toilet. Like, no way. Like, how big of a fight do you want? So how do you go from that to getting Colin to sit on the toilet? So we did this thing. We installed a toilet, and then up here, there's a television set, and it has his favorite video on it. And when he sat on the seat, it would turn the TV on. And when he got off the seat, it would turn the TV off. So over the course of a year and a half, we got Colin to come in there and sit there on the toilet and watch his favorite movie. And then pretty soon, he kind of peed on the toilet. And then 2 years later, he had a BM on the toilet. This was 6 years ago. Now Colin uses the toilet 95.6% of the time, and there's no TV. There's no TV. So the TV was a trick, in a way, and so everybody wants to grab onto the trick. But what's really going on here is about patience. It's about believing that things can change. That just because Colin wouldn't use the toilet, in 2002, doesn't mean he couldn't use the toilet in 2007. We have to keep working at it. So that notion of adaptation. So you can see here was a situation where Colin is unsteady on his feet. He's kind of always sort of on the move a little bit. So if you're trying to shave Colin, it's really difficult. So we install a chair near the sink so that he could sit down and could shave him. But later on, Colin, in order to have so much as an examination of his teeth or a physical, he has to be anesthetized in a hospital setting. Because he's not going to let anybody handle him like that. He's not going to let anybody touch him like that. It's just not happening for Colin. So he gets this disease in his eye. It's beginning to cause the cornea to separate from his eye. And he has to have drops put in his eye. So can he go to the hospital every day to have drops put in his eye? He's going to have to be anesthetized to do that. We got to figure out how I'm going to get staff, how I'm going to get Colin to sit down, put his head back, and let me put drops in his eyes. Like, good luck. Well, we start slow. We already got a place where Colin sits down. So then we put a little thing on the wall where he can put his head back. So over the course of several weeks, we get Colin to sit down and put his head back, just for a couple of seconds. And then later we add this little spinner up on the ceiling so he gets looking at the spinner. And 4 months later, we approach him and get him to open his eye. And 4 months after that, we start putting a drop in his eye. And he'll go in and sit down and allow you to put drops in his eyes 3 times. Without the physical environment supporting that experience, there was no way you were going to get drops in Colin's eyes. And he could have lost the sight of an eye. So the environment matters, folks. The environment matters. And you've got to be able to build those kind of flexible things into it. So the guy going up the stairs in the wheelchair, is that like, you look at that picture and you go, well, he needs a ramp. He needs an elevator. Do you blame that guy for not going up the stairs in the wheelchair? Doesn't even occur to us, right? But you look at this bathroom scene over here, right? Yeah. Shouldn't everybody be able to use that bathroom? I mean, really, they got it all figured out. I mean, in case you can't sit up straight, they got a little thing there and some seat belts. What is it? What do you mean there are people that can't use that? Who would that be? Don't you know privacy? Get over it. Did you know that one? But there are people that cannot use that toilet. But we'll blame a person who should arguably be able to use that toilet. I mean, they can sit down. Their bowels move. But we don't blame that guy. So how do we get those two things on par? So this is my friend Victor. And Victor lived in a group home. And in Oregon, you can't have a husband or wife if you live in a group home. You can't be married and live in a group home. In fact, you can't have sex if you live in a group home. So Victor falls in love with Linda. He wants to get married. So he's got to leave the group home. So he moves out of the group home, moves into an apartment, ultimately moves into a duplex. And at first, he just needed 1 bar on the toilet to make a transfer. Then he needed 2 bars. Then he needed a trapeze. So 12 years after he moved into the apartment, there came a day where he transferred to the toilet and fell between the toilet and the sink. And he was stuck there until staff showed up at 2 o'clock to get him out. And so at that point, this is the day that the physical therapist said, without a lift, Victor can't live here safely anymore. So he moved out. So your environment doesn't work for you. It's back to those basic things. Get in the door, get on the toilet, you can stay home. You can't do those two things, you got to go. And he had to move out. And it was the last thing he wanted to do. So parents sometimes limit the choice of their kids. So if you have a kid, Bernicia got up in the middle of the night and went into her brothers and sisters' rooms and bit them. And Noah would take off in the middle of the night, out the front door, go across the street, and head for the school playground. And Kyle would bolt out his window. So parents put bars on the windows. They had cribs that were more like cages. They put double keyed cylinder deadbolts on the doors. These are all unsafe things. In an emergency, how would it all work out? But what do parents do? Has anybody helped them solve that problem? They're like, you guys are on your own. Figure it out. And so they did figure it out. Kids are still in the home and they're safe, but we got to do better. We got to do better than that. Create environments that encourage exploration, curiosity, and this is, this is in many ways accomplishing the same thing that Bernicia's cage accomplished. This is Darlene, and she has wild sleep habits. She only sleeps 45 minutes at a time, up for 3 or 4 hours, then takes a 15-minute nap, then up for a little bit. Now you're a mom or you're a dad, and how long can you do that? Really, how long can you do it? I'm amazed at how long parents do it. They just keep it up. They just keep doing it. They'll even know to stop, right? And then you put them in respite, and then they can't go back to it, right? But, so this is the idea of, things that made her have something going on there. It's like, can we think about ways of helping control behavior short of restraining it? If the environment's broken, you can't fix a problem. You've got to deal with that first. Nathan just put his arm through the window again. How am I going to think about, Nathan having more control of his life? How am I going to think about Nathan being self-directed? How am I going to think about that when he's putting his arm through the window again? So what am I thinking about all the time? I'm thinking about that. I'm throwing my body between he and the window, or kick the hole in the wall, or sits down and uses his head to bash holes in the wall. All of these are real things, but all of these have really pretty simplistic technical solutions. Kyle ate a mattress. Took him a year. Took about 1 year. And you can see what he would do there. So the caseworker is saying, well, what is mom up to? What's going on here? Can't mom deal with this? Isn't she putting fitted sheets on there? Isn't she figuring out a way to keep this from happening? Well, yeah, she was working at it every single day, right? Because that stuff floats in the toilet, the mattress, when you eat it. So she's dealing with that. So you think mom's not trying to figure out a way to keep Kyle from eating that mattress? You bet she is. So, it's like for us, it's like Kyle eats a mattress. I don't judge that. I just don't judge it. I don't judge Kyle. I don't judge his mom. What's the problem here? The problem is Kyle's eating the mattress. How do we figure out how to keep Carl from eating the damn mattress? Pretty straightforward, right? So this is ballistic nylon. They make toys for gorillas out of that stuff. You can't push a pair of scissors through it. We make them active. But you know what really is the key? There are other really durable fabrics that can do this, right? You see them in prisons. But this one has sufficient texture that it actually will keep the sheets on. The rest of them, you lay down and the sheets go, bing. In the institution, I guarantee you. Lay down on any of the beds and roll over, ping, sheets gone. Right? You're 35 years old, 6'1", you're sleeping on a single bed.
Yeah, not even straight.
Really? That's it? Okay. So, you saw some of those problems, broken windows, holes in the walls. So these are some technical solutions to that. Reinforced plywood walls, tempered glass windows, curtains that when you pull them down, pop away and can be put back up. But you know what really works about this? It's like a normal looking deal, right? Too many homes that I go to, they look like war zones. People have screwed plexiglass up to the walls and there's holes in this. It's just like nobody wants to come over. Nobody wants to hang out with your kids. It's not a cool place. It's not a home. And This can be a home. So we can put those things behind the walls, and it's right down to the absolute small detail. Like, how is the receptacle actually reinforced in the wall so that if you kick it, it doesn't just blow through? And why don't the cover plates break? Because all of those things have been thought out so that Ronnie could go after this place. And when we went to Ronnie's house, there was not one single window in the house that had glass in it. Not one. There was not one wall in the house that didn't have a hole in it from his head. Not one. So can he test the strength of materials? Absolutely. Absolutely. And he couldn't break this. He couldn't break this. What about a soft wall? Some of the people who were moved out of institution had self-injurious behaviors. And then we're working with staff. We're trying to figure out how to deal with this in community. And the woman, Christy Gallego, said to me, "Damn, I just wish there were soft walls." Well, Google soft walls. And all they talk about are walls in prisons, where they're making sure that people can't poke a hole through them, and they're like $250 a square foot. So we developed a strategy for creating a soft wall, which is pretty simple: plywood reinforcement, 1 inch of closed cell foam, and then a material called core guard over top of it. It rounded the corners, and it's a soft wall. Soft wall. And it's not a bank breaker to put it together. So we took the soft wall and we made a soft house. So built-in furnishings, padded furnishings, soft details in the bedroom. And part of it's about, like, meet people where they are. Like, what's happening right now? And just sort of deal with that circumstance. Meet them where they are. And just to make the environmental accommodation that works. Sometimes what I found was you wish later that you'd waited till they moved out before you did some of the things that you did. Because I'd go to the institution and they say, "I'm moving John." Be careful of John. Don't get up too close to him. He'll spit on you. And his teeth have been pulled because he bites staff, right? And he's always got snot all over his face. And he kind of hisses and he just sits in one place. Don't go anywhere near him. He is, he's hell on wheels. Tears his clothes apart, right? So we move John, and we do everything, we got the bulletproof walls, and we got those things. John comes out, no more spit all over his face. No more hissing at people. And what you realized was, nobody messed with John at the institution. Nobody got anywhere near John at the institution. So he developed a way of living, just like you would, if people got after you sometimes. If they dropped you on that stainless steel cold tub, maybe you'd spit at them too. So the environment matters. I mean, we're all sitting here, we're all living a certain way right now because this is what we're expected to do. You're listening to a presentation, I'm standing up here doing my part, you're doing your part. If I take you to a football game, you'll act differently. If I put you in church, you'll act differently still. In fact, matter is, where I put you is a greater predictor of how you behave than your personalities. And it's just as true for people with disability.